I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society, and welcome to another Monuments Monday. And I thought that today I'd talk a little more about Abraham Bryan. Undoubtedly, Abraham Bryan is the most famous Black resident associated with the Battle of Gettysburg, and for good reason. His house was located along Cemetery Ridge, directly in the Union line of battle. And he owned a stretch of the stone wall that was used to repulse the most famous charge in American history. And since its inception, Hancock Avenue was designed to pass directly between Bryan's house and barn. And remember, in the early days of the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association, this was one of the first stops that visitors would come to when they passed along Hancock Avenue after leaving the National Cemetery. The War Department built a tower right behind the house, and every visitor stopped there at the house and climbed the tower. And of course, in 1962, the National Park Service built the new visitor center, the Cyclorama complex, and right outside of its back doors, in the back was the backyard of Abraham Bryan's house. And of course, remember that the War Department put a commemorative sign in front of the structure that says, "The Bryan House." Some might not approve of us counting this as a monument, but we do. When we say there are almost 1,800 monuments, markers, and tablets on the Gettysburg National Military Park, we are counting these tablets. According to the count done by licensed battlefield guide Fred Hawthorne, there are over 100 of these commemorative markers on the field. And this particular tablet was placed during the year 1900, as stated in the report of the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission. It was given on October 2nd, 1900, and it says, "Tablets have been erected marking important historical places on the battlefield. Spangler Spring, Culp's Hill, Stevens Knoll, East Cemetery Hill, Ziegler's Grove, Bryan House, The Angle, George Weichert House, Trossel House, Excelsior Field, The Loop, Devil's Den, Little Round Top, The Wheat Field, Barlow's Knoll, Oak Ridge, and Reynolds Woods." Interesting. Can someone explain to me in the comments why it's necessary to place an iron marker that says "The Loop"? I know the road originally formed a loop, but really, is that a historical feature associated with the battlefield? And I should mention there are also avenue markers and position of troops markers that fit into this category. And I think we should point out that dozens of these markers once existed, but no longer exist on the battlefield. I think that might be a topic for a future Monument Monday. Markers that used to be on the battlefield, but no longer are. I think we should use those in our monument count. But of course, we are discussing the Bryan House, or what I like to call, this video more about Abraham Bryan. First of all, the spelling. The spelling used on the War Department tablet is entirely based upon the Warren Map spelling of Bryan, B-R-Y-A-N. But it's important to remember that Abraham Bryan could not read or write. There are several sources for that, including the 1870 census, which checks the box that he could not read or write. Considering the fact that he never spelled his own name, and in the records there are a great amount of variations of the name given, I wanted to mention a few. So often the name is spelled Bryan, B-R-Y-A-N, Bryan, B-R-I-A-N, or Bryan, B-R-E-I-N. There are also sources that mention it as Bryant, B-R-Y-A-N-T. And oddly enough, there are a bunch of sources that refer to his name as O'Brien or O'Brien or even Osborne. You may think that O'Brien cannot possibly be true, but it appears in several oil records and several of his children definitely use that as their last name. I personally use Brian, B-R-I-A-N, and that's the one we'll title this video with. And I use that because that is the name as given in his estate papers and on his tombstone in Evergreen Cemetery. I should also mention that there are two other black families in Gettysburg prior to the Civil War that shared the same surname. There is the family of Moses O'Brien, or Bryan, and Sidney Bryant, or Bryan. Of course, Sidney, who was once the slave of the Geddes family, that name refers to her husband, who she was obviously a widow of. To make it easier to separate them, I generally have referred to Moses as O'Brien and Sidney as Bryant. But again, that's generic to my terminology. And, you know, it's possible that all of these people had a common ancestor in Maryland named Bryan, and they were related. We know that Abraham Bryan is from Maryland, and we know that he first appears in the Gettysburg records about 1833, and first is shown with property in Gettysburg in 1844. At the moment, I have no idea where in Maryland he may come from. And it is not known whether he was a former slave or not. I do have some theories based on where individuals lived in Maryland that were named Bryan in early records, but really this is a topic that's up for discussion. But let's talk about what we do know. There's an excellent research collection on the Bryan family in the papers of Albert Cook Myers at the Chester County Historical Society. Myers was born in Adams County. He was related to the Quakers of Adams County. His great-grandfather is known to have been active in the Underground Railroad, and his grandmother was a witness to the kidnapping of Kitty Payne by slave catchers in 1845. And remember, Kitty Payne was Abraham Bryan's second wife. And they had a child together. Myers did an incredible amount of research on the kidnapping and was going to write a book on it. And his manuscript exists at the Chester County Historical Society. But unfortunately, it was never published. But today, all of his research is available at Chester County Historical Society, and you can visit it. In the collection, there's correspondence and interviews with family members of Abraham Bryan. And according to one of his grandchildren, Abraham Bryan was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. And that makes a whole lot of sense to me. This fact was first pointed out to me by Dr. Martin Johnston, who is a professor at the University of Miami in Ohio. We mentioned that Bryan was married 3 times in last week's video, and he had 4 children with his first wife. After her death, he married Catherine or Kitty Payne, who had 3 children of her own. And they had a child together, Susan Frances Bryan, in 1848. So a couple stories that I wanted to relate that you can discover about his children in these early records. One of his daughters, Matilda Bryan, married Jeremiah Stewart, who was said to have served in the 24th United States Colored Troops. Anna M. Bryan, another daughter, married Isaac Madison, who served in the 127th United States Colored Troops. He enlisted from Gettysburg in 1864. Both of those couples are now buried in Lincoln Cemetery in Pembroke, Dauphin County, near Harrisburg. And another of Bryan's daughters has an incredible story. In June 1868, Susan Frances Bryan, the daughter of Kitty Payne, married William Henry Henson. Henson was born in Augusta, Georgia, to a slave mother and a white father who was also the owner of his mother. He was brought to Gettysburg as a cook in the Confederate Army, and during the battle, he escaped and stayed behind when the Southern Army retreated. Wow. I wish we knew more about this story. What I'd really like is if somebody out there has an image of Abraham Bryan, or if some people out there are related to one of his various children or their families. So if anybody has more to add, you can put that in the comments of this video. And remember, if you like the content we've been putting on our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe.